Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Northwestern Roundtable podcast. It's been a minute, but I'm so excited to be back talking ahead of Northwestern's bowl game this week against Central Michigan. I'm your host, as always, Gavin Dorsey, publisher of Northwestern Roundtable, and I'm here joined with Sports Illustrated's Zach Koons, also the host of the Bleav in Northwestern podcast. Zach, how are you doing today?
Gavin, I'm doing great. I'm really excited to be back on the show. I love this time of year for college football. It's always like a little bit chaotic, but it's a great time. I'm really excited to see Northwestern back in a bowl game, something that feels a little bit meaningful, and maybe something to help cement this as the successful season that I really think this is for the Wildcats.
Yeah, I absolutely think so as well. Northwestern on December 26th is going to play Central Michigan in the GameAbove Sports Bowl. It is the second bowl game in the 3 years of David Braun's tenure. The Central Michigan Chippewas went 7-5 this year, including 5-3 in the MAC. Northwestern, of course, finished 6-6 after that tough loss to Illinois in the finale. But first, kind of wanted to generally start with some broad picture thoughts. This is now our second year of the college football playoff. And like the first year of the 12-team college football playoff, and like every other year seemingly of the college football playoff, there has been controversy about what teams have gotten in, what teams deserve to get in, whether there should be automatic bids, things of that nature. We are currently one round in. The second round will be coming next week by New Year's. But overall, Zach, what has been your thoughts on how everything's gone so far? Is the system broken? Is the system just fine? Is it okay to have blowouts in playoff games? What are your thoughts on that?
Like I think generally, as college football fans, part of the greatness of this sport is that we love to argue about it. Like, we love to argue about what the format is going to be and who deserves to be in, and that's part of what makes it great. So I think, honestly, when people are complaining about a couple first-round games that maybe weren't all that competitive, I think that is, that's fine, honestly. Like, that's what makes this sport so good. And frankly, I thought the first round was pretty compelling. Now, from a game standpoint, maybe not all that competitive, right? You have James Madison going on the road and not really being able to keep close to Oregon. You have Tulane going into the Grove and really struggling against Ole Miss and Oxford. Now, that being said, the margin of victory was 19.25 points per game in 2024, and in 2025, it was 16.5. So these games were less blowouts than they were last year when we had Ohio State going into Knoxville and just running the Vols off the field. Or in the second round, we had Ohio State play Oregon in the Rose Bowl, and they were up 34-0 in the second round. So I think there's some like selective memory holing, really, where it's like, yes, the Tulanes and the James Madisons of the world happened to find their way into the 12-team field this year, but I didn't think it made it any less compelling. We still have the storylines of things like Lane Kiffin not being there at Ole Miss and Pete Davidson having this incredible run as the interim coach, and Charlie Weiss Jr. coming back and calling the plays, or you had the Alabama comeback against Oklahoma in Norman and kind of finding their footing at this time when Kalen DeBoer, all these rumors swirling around him, potentially looking for an exit strategy outside of Tuscaloosa. So I thought it was a pretty compelling first round. It's okay. There's going to be blowouts sometimes. Frankly, if we want to keep the 12-team field and we want to run the 12-team field for another decade, we may never have another scenario again where both Tulane and James Madison both make it into the field. So I've really enjoyed it so far, and it's really left us with some really tasty quarterfinal matchups.
Certainly. I'm assuming you meant Pete Golden there instead of Pete Davidson.
Pete Davidson, yeah. I don't know what came over me there. As soon as I said it, I was like, I must be watching a little bit too much Saturday Night Live there, but thanks.
Yeah. I mean, I've been enjoying it too. And that's not just because I'm a fan of smaller schools playing football. And also, I think that college football is the only collegiate NCAA sport where if you win your conference, you don't have a guaranteed shot at a national championship. This, at least in the 12-team playoff, gets it closer to that. And like you mentioned, there have been these cases like Tennessee last year or even Oregon last year where they have gotten blown out, just has completely been not competitive. And it's not like they've said, people have said, let's leave out the entire SEC because Tennessee was so bad. Let's leave out the entire Big Ten because Oregon was so bad. It's really just kind of these media talking heads that they want their ratings to do well. And so they want bigger schools to talk about and things like that. And I think, the thing about James Madison, they scored more on Oregon this year than anybody did. I mean, Tulane, people were talking that Duke should have gotten in as the ACC champion. Tulane beat Duke. I just think that it's such an exhausting conversation, and it's unfortunate because in sports like March Madness, we relish the underdog. Everyone loves it. And because of the style of sport that is, you can afford to have these massive fields and understand that there's going to be blowouts and that upsets will come because of that. With football, you kind of have to limit the amount of games that you're doing. There's too much head-to-head contact, too much chance of risk of injury as well. And so you can't really do that. I do think that the 12-team playoff is probably the perfect mold or the perfect fit of you get a top small school to come in who is deserving, and then you also get 11 other teams in, and of that, you're probably going to find your national champion. It's not saying that every single year a group of 5 team is going to be competitive with a power conference team, especially in this case, the number 5 and the number 6 teams in the nation. But it's for when you do get those 2017 UCF or 2021 Cincinnati, that they are not excluded and they don't have to, have issues like that where they're left out of the playoffs. So I'm okay with that. I think people also forget all the amount of times that those kinds of upsets have happened. Like we saw Tulane literally beat the Heisman Trophy winner and Caleb Williams and USC a couple of years ago in the Cotton Bowl, when that was a team that was going to be in the playoff just a week before when they blew it in the Pac-12 championship. I mean, everybody they talk about Notre Dame. Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois last year, and they lost to Marshall, I think 2 or 3 years ago, something like that. These kind of upsets happen, and if we don't allow them to happen in the playoffs and understand that there are going to be blowouts sometimes, there's blowouts no matter what the name on or the logo on the helmet is. And so for me personally, as a football fan, has been in general frustrating, but I think I have some faith that everything will eventually pay off. Are you, Zach, are you a soccer fan at all? Have you put any thought into a super league, a relegation, promotion, anything like that?
No, I would say I dabble in the the real world of football, but I can't say that college football, like I don't think that like really makes sense from a relegation promotion standpoint. I mean, I do think that's probably where we're trending is towards a super league, and it's going to be the teams that Bleav and the programs that have the historical success and Bleav they're part of the in crowd. They are going to do whatever it takes to clutch their pearls and keep out anybody that's not a member of that in crowd. And right now, that's the Big Ten, that's the SEC, and that's Notre Dame. Like, frankly, other than that, and well, of course, there are teams in the other conferences that will do their best, like a Clemson to try and, like a Florida State, to try and finagle their way into that kind of that Super League conference. But yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I don't love the 12-team playoff. I think if in some ways it either needs to be more exclusionary, or we should let in an automatic conference championship from all FBS conferences. And, it feels like we're kind of doing this half and half thing right now, and at least extending an olive branch for one group of 6 team to finally get their way into the field. But the other point here is this is year 2. This is the second year of the 12-team field, and already everybody wants to blow it up and throw it in the trash and get rid of and tell all of these group of 6 teams, sorry, you're just not good enough. It's year 2. Let's relax. How about we try and give this a couple years to figure it out? Now, I don't really think that's going to happen. TV wants all the money they can get. We're headed towards a 16-team field, and there's probably still only going to be 1 spot reserved for the group of 6. It's just going to be the way that it is, but let's protect that 1 spot at least.
Do you think that 24 teams is too big if it includes all of the 9, 10 conferences? If you get a Sun Belt and a MAC and a Mountain West and the new Pac-12, is 24 too big if you get all of those included?
24 is way too big, Gavin.
The FCS does 24 teams, and that's a phenomenal bracket. But they also start that in first week of December.
Right. So then if you want to go up to 24 teams, conference championship games then get a little fuzzy. And in that scenario where you have to get the automatic bid from each of the 9 conferences, you need to play conference championship games. So that's where I think it gets a little a little complicated, whereas I think you could still do 16 teams, and then you could have the automatic bid from each of the 9 conferences, 7 at-large bids, which, this year would include teams like Ohio State and Oregon and Ole Miss and Texas A&M and Miami, and Notre Dame gets in, I think, in that scenario. But you still kind of get all of the major power players. Frankly, Gavin, and I don't want to like trash the FCS, or it works a little bit better there, where I think the talent is a little bit more widespread and there's a little bit more of that randomness. The 24th best team in the country is not deserving of playing for a national championship. Frankly, I'm not even sure that number 10 Miami this year is worthy of playing for a national championship, even if I think Miami might be right now a top 5 team in the country. But, like that's why we play these other regular season games. That's why we play them. And I'm sorry, if you lose a couple early on in the year, then it's not your championship to win when it comes time for that third weekend in January.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I definitely agree. The thing though that would be interesting is, expanding to a 16 team and definitely for sure to a 24 team would definitely increase the chances of seeing Northwestern someday in the college football playoff. I mean, we go back to 2020, they would have been in a 12 team, I want to say. They had dropped because of that Michigan State loss, but ended up playing close to, or I want to say Northwestern actually might have been 14 that year. And before that, a couple of the Pat Fitzgerald years, I want to say they got into the mid-teens. Definitely would have been possible. Honestly, kind of the way that things are looking with expanded conferences, it's not impossible to envision a situation where Northwestern gets a schedule like Indiana did last year. And now that was a good Indiana team. I will always be on the record saying that, and obviously seeing what they've done this year. It's not impossible to envision Northwestern getting a schedule like that and being able to make a run into one of those 9, 10, 11, 12 from essentially not having to play anybody difficult this year. I mean, you've seen several teams. Texas A&M went 11-0, having played basically nobody and lost their last 2 games of the season. I'm not going to say that, there's a viable chance for Northwestern to someday get in the playoff, because obviously Texas A&M is a much bigger brand and has a lot more people lobbying for it than Northwestern. But it is interesting with seeing how much this playoff expands. You could start someday. Could the Wildcats be having a home playoff game? Could they be just going to a playoff game in general? We could definitely be trending in that direction. I'll be interested to see it.
I think we need quite a few things to change in Evanston. Number one, yeah, I mean, you mentioned Texas A&M, but the amount of money that has been invested in that roster, not only just this year, but over a number of years, where I think this year they were one of the 7 or 8 highest spenders in the sport. And yeah, so I mean, there's certainly going to need to be some investment from Northwestern on that standpoint. And, I as much as I feel that it would be great for Northwestern to host a playoff game or to call itself a playoff team, I mean, I would still feel the same about Northwestern being in a field of 24, as I just said, where I don't think the 23rd, the 24th, even the 17th best team in the country really deserves a chance to play for a college football playoff. But yeah, I think if it does keep trending in that way, it does open up the opportunity for a lot of these programs a lot more. I mean, I think just seeing the raw passion by the James Madison fans that were out at Autzen Stadium, or to see all of those games on campus. I mean, the Grove in Oxford just looked excellent, and everything swirling around Lane Kiffin. Like, that was a really cathartic moment for all of those fans and for that program as a whole. And it's so good to have those home playoff games and to open this up to more and more teams. That being said, it's still inherently kind of exclusionary. Like, right now, this is an invitational that is set by the College Football Playoff Committee. Maybe the only way to kind of open it up is really to give those automatic bids and go from there. And Northwestern, yeah, it is. They have a chance, certainly, to have the schedule break their way in any given year. That doesn't mean that you're not going to have to win those 1 or 2 games that you're going to be a pretty massive underdog in. You're really going to have to step up, because I think if we can continue with this model with the committee, eventually the committee is going to stay sharp on the schedule disparity, and I think is going to start to penalize teams for not playing that harder strength of schedule.
Yeah, definitely. I think the one thing that doesn't, that doesn't quite bother me as much as it seems to bother, a lot of other people. And especially you saying here, does the 23rd or 24th best team in the nation deserve to play for a national championship? Is that there are so many more important things in college sports and college football than playing for a national championship. I mean, think about Northwestern
That's
in
the
March
truth right
Madness
there.
the last
Yeah.
couple of years. Neither of those teams were teams that were contending for national championships, but just getting into the dance and saying, hey, we have a chance here and we are going toward a conference championship so we can try and clinch that automatic bid. I mean, that means something to programs. These rivalries, these late game matchups, it means that, those like week 11, week 12, week 13 matchups mean so much more for more teams. And I'm a proponent of staying at, probably 12, 16 is like, seems like it'd be the middle area. I was always a fan of the 8, but, now thinking about it a little bit more, 12 or 16 is probably a little bit better. But I do love more fans across the country being able to be engaged in something like that and being able to really just take part in, the greatest format in deciding a champion ever in tournaments, um, anyways, kind of moving on a little bit into talking to Northwestern somewhat. I realized we had gone on quite a bit about, the college football playoffs been on my mind lately, of course. But the Wildcats are playing in Detroit on Friday at Ford Field. It'll be their second time there, joining the 2003 Motor City Bowl, which interestingly is not the same bowl game as the GameAbove Sports Bowl. It was the Little Caesars Bowl for a while and then stopped entirely. The next year was an entirely different bowl game, starting with the Quick Lane Bowl, now into the GameAbove Sports Bowl. In overall, in looking at this, I think they're pretty heavy favorites over the Chippewas. How are you kind of expecting this to go for the Wildcats? Do you think it'll be a low scoring, tightly contested affair, or do you think Northwestern against a MAC opponent in Central Michigan is just overmatching them?
I'm just impressed at your knowledge of the lineage of bowl games. Quite frankly, Gavin, that's what I'm hung up on. But no, yeah, I think this is going to be your standard Big Ten West in December kind of game where I think both of these teams really like to run the football. And I spoke with Alex Shear of the Mac Sports Connection podcast, and he kind of has this great knowledge of exactly where all of these teams in the MAC have been this year. And Central Michigan was in a little bit of a transition phase and they'd kind of lost some identity, I think, under Jim McElwain, and were not able to remain consistent for a number of years. And this has been a really strong MAC program. They bring in Matt Drinkle, who was the former offensive line coach at Army, and he kind of instilled this run first. We're going to use one throwing quarterback. We're going to use one quarterback to run, and really take this really hard-nosed approach with a really tough offensive line and a really tough run game, and all of a sudden went around and won 7 games this year. That being said, I don't think that we were talking about all of this difficulty of schedules. The way that Central Michigan kind of carved its way through the MAC this year was with getting to avoid a lot of the tougher games on the schedule. So like they didn't have to play Miami of Ohio, who was playing in the conference championship game. They went on the road to Western Michigan, who ended up winning the MAC and lost 24-21. But when they played Power 4 opponents in Pittsburgh and Michigan and had to go on the road for both of those, Central Michigan lost by 28 to Pitt and by 60 to Michigan. Now, I don't think it's going to be the exact transitive property, right? Northwestern only lost by a point to Michigan, despite being +5 in the turnover margin, which I continue to remind myself daily at this point. But I don't think that Central Michigan is going to go out and get blown out by Northwestern. I think they're really going to drag Northwestern into the mud. There's going to be a lot of kind of time of possession games being played in this matchup. And I think ultimately Northwestern is going to just pull away late. I don't see ultimately this game being within 1 or maybe even 2 scores. So I think I had predicted something like a 14 to 17 point margin. I'm jumping ahead a little bit. I don't want to quite give my official prediction here on the podcast just yet, but I do think it's going to be low scoring. It's going to be defense, kind of like the nice sleepy bowl game that you like to have after maybe a big meal the night before on Christmas if you're celebrating, and really, you just get to lay around the next day and enjoy some defense.
Definitely. I remember going to the opening press conference between Coach Drinkle and Coach Braun, and both of them said basically the same thing. When you turn on the tape, it looks like you're looking in a mirror almost. These are two teams that are going to play a lot of defense, run the football, not really air it out. However, in looking through, who Central Michigan has played this year, how they've performed, I can't help but notice those performances against the power teams and that massive loss to Michigan, which Northwestern admittedly played pretty close. It could have been things obviously could have been different. Northwestern probably should have won that game with the 5-0 turnover margin. I don't know. I think that this is a game that Northwestern wins big. And I know that, people can talk about the limited possessions that are going to happen and overall, like the fact that the way that these teams play should be low scoring. But I can't get the feeling out of my head that Northwestern is really mad about the way that that season ended with the loss to Illinois and the loss in a rivalry game. Caleb Komolafe is coming back. We'll see if Joseph Hyman's healthy for that. I think Coach Brown's going to want to rotate through a lot of different players, especially try and figure out, is Ryan Bowe next year's quarterback? I don't know. We'll see. Now we can actually figure that out with the transfer portal not opening until beginning of January and not having to, get somebody lined up before that. But I think it'll definitely be interesting to see. Is there a certain key or something that you think could really set Northwestern apart in this game?
Yeah, and I think I'm really interested about the Ryan Bowe potential, and I think we're going to see some more of him, maybe particularly in the red zone, because something that Central Michigan is really good at, and I kind of think this has been kind of the story for Northwestern this year has been how much they've struggled in the red zone offensively. Central Michigan was 12th in the country in red zone defense this year. And that just like kind of popped out to me because if you look at them statistically, it's they're 8th in the MAC in offense, they're 8th in the MAC in defense. Like this is kind of a team that overperformed really what it was statistically this season, but because it was doing things like winning close games, winning in the margins, being really good in the red zone. And so I think that's really the area for Northwestern that I'd like to see them focus on in this game, whether that's Preston Stone kind of showing maybe what Northwestern's offense could be in the quick passing game next season, whether that's bringing out Ryan Bowe and letting him, throw a couple passes. Sure, you want to win the game. Whenever Ryan Bowe was out there during the regular season and I saw him throwing in the red zone, I thought I was going to lose my mind because I would have much preferred to see Preston Stone throw those passes when he'd been the quarterback for the entire season. But maybe this is a game where you let Ryan Bowe kind of run some RPO, kind of try to figure some things out, see what Northwestern can be with this roster moving forward. But it's all going to be about that red zone. I'm not really worried about Northwestern defensively in this game. Central Michigan, like I said, will kind of run that 2-quarterback system. Northwestern already saw a similar system against Louisiana Monroe. And what did Northwestern do? They blew the doors off the Warhawks really in those final 3 quarters. And that's the thing. David Braun has not lost games as the head coach at Northwestern to teams he's not supposed to lose to. When Northwestern is this big of a favorite, the Wildcats tend to really commit. And I think you're right. I think everybody was ticked off with how this season went. You saw that down the stretch with David Braun getting frustrated at Wrigley after the Michigan game, or really just the players. I think this team really thought it was going to be a lot better than 6-6, and maybe was pretty annoyed at how many people predicted things were going to go in the preseason. This is a chance to go out and prove that you really are a team that can dominate. You're a team that really can dominate, especially opponents from these lesser conferences or maybe that don't have as much talent. So yeah, I think I definitely understand where you're coming from in terms of how motivated Northwestern is going to be for this game.
Yeah, and I definitely agree. I think that this is going to be a really exciting game in terms of getting to see some creativity, especially from Zach Lujan and from seeing different packages, different players. I think putting in Ryan Bowe on the 10-yard line against Michigan is probably not the best idea, but doing it the day after Christmas on the GameAbove Sports Bowl against the MAC team, that's where that kind of stuff is made for. I would love to see the Wildcats experiment with so many different trick plays, different formations. Let's put Robbie Preckle at the Wildcat, see what he does. I don't even know. But I think overall it should be a really fun game in terms of getting to see what Northwestern's depth has, especially the pieces behind what is a very veteran team. And the sooner that Northwestern can get up by a significant amount, I think the sooner that we're going to see, a lot of that. I think we'd previously kind of talked about what we're feeling for this game. If you had a score prediction, I know you mentioned you think it's going to be a little closer where Northwestern pulls away at the end. What are you thinking at the moment?
Yeah, I think it is going to be within kind of that 1 or 2 score range, especially in the first half. And you're kind of going to be sweating it out a little bit, and then it's going to be like if Central Michigan could just kick a field goal here to cut the lead to 7. But I do think in the third and fourth quarter, I think you're just going to see Northwestern size, physicality, coaching, really just the skill of this Northwestern team start to pull away. I think I had predicted on my podcast 27-10. So I'm going to stick by that. So yeah, it won't end up looking really all that close. Northwestern, I think, should cover with relative ease here. Although the books don't really seem to like Northwestern by too much in this game. I think they're 10.5 point favorites as we record. I like Northwestern to win by 3 scores, so 27-10.
Okay. I'm going a little bit more. I'm going to say 41-17. We talked a little bit about the Louisiana Monroe game and the two quarterbacks. And I just think that this is, obviously Central Michigan is a better team than that. But I think in kind of the same way that Northwestern's going to dominate, where the run game just really gets rolling, and you suddenly have guys breaking loose for long touchdowns that maybe we haven't seen break loose for long touchdowns earlier in the season. Caleb Komolafe, very talented, very in between the tackles, ground and pound, but when he can break some loose, and I definitely think he'll have those opportunities. I'm assuming if Hyman can't go and Deshaun Reeder can't go, we'll see a lot of those freshmen, with speed, maybe Daniel Anderson, like. I mean, I look back to the Citrus Bowl against Auburn in 2020, 2021, technically, and how that just became kind of the emergence of Cam Porter game initially then as a true freshman, and just putting in, that was kind of first when we saw Evan Hull the week before as well at Illinois, and, then in the Citrus Bowl as well, just really experimenting so many different things, letting kind of everybody take a slice of the opposing defense. So I am going to say that it becomes much more lopsided in the second half. I think I wouldn't be surprised if this was a 17-10 or a 20-10 game at halftime and Northwestern just pulls away, because I do think that Northwestern's run game and Northwestern's run game, I think, statistically is understated because of that rough last game against Illinois where they had literally nobody except for essentially a fullback, a true freshman fullback. So I do think that Northwestern is going to run away with this one. Any bold predictions for the game? Anything that you're expecting or wouldn't be surprised if it happens?
Yeah, I like it. I'm going to say that David Braun is going to go for it on 4th down 5 different times in this game. I think maybe I'm just manifesting something that I'd like to see. And perhaps some of that will come in the red zone as well, because I've been a little bit critical of him this year and some of the opportunities that I think he should have gone for it on 4th down, should have pushed this offense. Look, there's nothing, you're playing to win this football game, and that's it. There's nothing waiting on the other side for any of these seniors. There's nothing waiting on the other side for the rest of the season. So you might as well play all of your cards. 5 4th down opportunities. If I really want to get bold, I think Northwestern will be successful on 4 of those 5. 4 out of 5 on 4th downs.
Okay. I'm gonna say Preston Stone MVP of the game
Oh,
because
nice.
I,
Not
I
Robbie
mentioned.
Preckle. I thought that would have been the obvious choice, but maybe
Maybe
not.
it depends on if Robbie Preckle throws a touchdown. We'll see
Fair enough.
if they can do a wildcat run where everybody thinks he's just going to pound it up the middle and he lofts it over the top. You can give Robbie Preckle MVP of the game. But I think especially after a rough fourth quarter performance in Illinois, where he just had, I think it was 3 turnovers in a row, and really just the opposite of what we saw against Minnesota. I think he recognizes that this is his last collegiate game, no matter what. He doesn't have any eligibility remaining. And even though I think Northwestern's run game is going to lead to a victory, I think he's going to end up with a pretty good stat line. Comparatively, I think Northwestern's offensive run game production will be spread out between a lot of different rushers, whereas all the passes will be for him. So I don't know. I don't think that's a super bold prediction, but I think given the way that this season has been for him, up and down, and especially how that last game was, that's where I'm leaning. Do you have any time for a little bit of men's basketball talk real quick before we hop off?
Absolutely. Let's end it on maybe a more sour note than we think for Northwestern's bowl game opportunities.
Yeah, we probably could have started with that, honestly, end on a high note instead, but Northwestern's 7-5 now. They've lost their 4 of their 6 close games that they've played so far, only able to beat DePaul at the buzzer and narrowly avoiding a collapse against South Carolina. Is it too early to panic, or is it just the perfect time to panic here for Chris Collins' squad?
I mean, I think it's way too early to panic, but that might just be my belief that none of this non-conference stuff anymore, especially in the expanded Big Ten, is a death knell for any team. Like it just doesn't. It's not that it doesn't matter. And sure, if you go out and you lose to, Western Illinois, like Northwestern almost did last year, if I remember correctly, or if you go out and you lose to Mercyhurst in the season opener, then we're having a
Chicago
different
State. They made the
right.
tournament the same year they lost to Chicago State.
Exactly. No, and so right. Thank you for reminding everybody of that. So then when you're losing to teams like Oklahoma State, who's maybe not a great team but got off to a really, really good start. You're losing to teams like UVA, who are really well coached and have tons of talent. You're losing a 3-point game to Butler in which you allowed 61 points without your best offensive player on the floor. I really just don't think, and maybe I should be way more panicked, I really just don't think it's over for Northwestern, and it's certainly not, we shouldn't already be thinking about next year. We shouldn't be like, oh, this is a lost season in Nick Martinelli's senior year. The issue, obviously, is that this Northwestern team just doesn't seem good enough. Like, I don't mean to be blunt, but this team has far bigger flaws than last season. And that was largely health impacted. That ultimately kind of, everything just kind of crumbled around, especially with Brooks Barnheiser just never really seeming fully like himself. But their Northwestern just didn't really have that sort of boo-booey closer. This year, they don't really have anybody for late game offense, and then has one of the worst defenses that a Chris Collins team has had. I mean, I looked it up just before recording here. They're 74th in KenPom defensive rating. The last time the team was that low, do you know when that was, Gavin?
Oh, I feel like even the 21-22 season was like they weren't atrocious. They were bad in late game situations. That was more so offensively.
So
I
will jump in.
Is it mid to late 2010s?
So you were right to mention the 21-22 season where they were 73rd defensively. So not quite that bad, but that was kind of the comparison season that I was really starting to think about. They went 15-16, and I was like, yeah, that kind of feels like where this team is headed for right now. The 2019-2020 season was really bleak. 8-23 that year. They were 100, and I lost my number here. Let me pull this back up. They fell like just a terrible team that year, and that's really was kind of the issue. I think they were in the 130s, and that obviously we won't get that bad. So they were 150th defensively, and they were 131st offensively, 132nd in KenPom this year. So I really don't think, obviously, Northwestern, they just can't be that bad this year. With a player like Nick Martinelli, there's just too much. There's too much stuff that I think Northwestern has this year, where there's like these flashes from Arrington Page, or there's really great moments from Jaden Reed, and then in some of the really not so great moments, you have guys like Sheravino who are going to give you some pop. This team is too good to be that bad. But are we headed for kind of a 21-22 season? I don't know. It's starting to seem like that, and that's what makes me more worried as we kind of enter the bulk of Big Ten play.
Yeah, I think long-term projection, everything's still fine. I would say, I like the way that the program is going. I think it's got a very steady, very steady basis on it. We always kind of knew that Nick Martinelli was the end of this era, and they were just looking for people to kind of surround him with. Northwestern has a really, really young team. There are a lot of talented players on this roster, not named Martinelli or Page, that are just freshmen and sophomores. And I think that the team is going to be really good in a year or two or three. The thing that does worry me is the fact that they just haven't had a closer. They haven't been able to finish in these close games, because as talented as Martinelli has been, and he obviously had the game-winning shot against DePaul, he can't do it all himself. He is physically limited in that way by, being a primarily post scorer, even though he's had some good 3-point shooting this year, primarily working from the same spot. Page, I Bleav, had the game winning shot as well over South Carolina. But, overall in Big Ten play, if you can't have somebody that you can consistently go to down the stretch, like a Boo Buie who won so many of those games, then you're just going to end up on the wrong side of every equation. Like this year, I want to say Northwestern was 352 out of 365 in luck, which, it's not actually luck. It's just how well the team, performs in close games. That 21-22 team, I want to say, was 363 out of 365 up until they won their last game, or the second last game of the regular season, or something like that. But that team was atrocious at finishing down the stretch. And I could see a very similar situation, happening this time. I'm not full doomer mode. Northwestern, per KenPom, I think is 56 overall. They're technically the best 5-loss team in the nation, but granted, that's not really saying much. You have to win games. You get into the tournament by wins and losses, and not by KenPom rankings or by strength of schedule or anything. So, playing a strong strength of schedule and playing every game close is good, but you have to come out with a win in those games. Any final takes before we log off? Can be football, men's basketball, women's basketball, anything you're thinking for the Wildcats as we head into this holiday season.
Yeah, no, I just want to shout out. I want to encourage people to continue to follow programs like field hockey and lacrosse, which are really kind of a passion project for mine. Lacrosse season is going to start up in earnest here in the spring, and Kelly Monte-Hiller should have a really great program again, kind of anchored by Maddie Taylor, and Northwestern's going to host the Final Four as well, which should be really, really exciting. So, and yeah, I mean, field hockey, I had the chance to talk to Tracy Fuchs and to talk to Maddie Zimmer, and had a really great conversation with them. And it's just it's an example. But in both cases, with Kelly Monte-Hiller and Tracy Fuchs, when you empower the person at the top of the program to be able to do what they need to do and do what they want to do to get that program to a better place, that Northwestern sports can have a lot of success. And I think those two are examples. And I understand that programs like football or programs like men's basketball, maybe not fully in the same way. But I think what Mark Jackson is doing is trying to really build from the top down, and then surround those people with the necessary tools to get better. And I think you're seeing some strides, right, in basketball, and you're seeing some strides in football. Given where Northwestern is at in the NIL era, and now moving into the revenue sharing era, there's a lot of opportunity to go, and Northwestern needs to be willing to stay competitive, and willing to spend that money, and willing to pour in those resources to get better. But it's working right now from the top down, and you have guys like Chris Collins, and you have guys like David Braun that it seems like Mark Jackson is pretty confident in moving forward. I really think it's a pretty exciting time, and maybe basketball doesn't turn it around. Yes, maybe football didn't win 10 games this year. We're still living in the golden age of Northwestern sports right now. It's never been better than this, and I want everybody to remember that. Yes, success comes with more expectations, but it's nice to have expectations. It's nice to expect great things from the programs, and largely, they're all trending in the right direction.
Right. 3 different Northwestern programs with national championships just in the last, 4 years, 3 years at this point in time. It's hard not to be just incredibly excited about this golden age of Northwestern sports and everything. And, especially as we're in this, this holiday season and the joys of everything, it's good to sit back and reflect and, really be thankful for all that Northwestern seems to really be investing in all of those sports, whether it's the, those revenue sports, or, like field hockey, lacrosse, women's golf, that have all, made incredible strides over the last couple of years, and really just made this, a powerhouse of a powerhouse of a women's sports school, and a really well-rounded, athletic department overall. So should be a really exciting time over the next year for the Wildcats. We'll obviously get to see lacrosse and women's golf compete in the spring, field hockey coming off the national championship, football with 1 game to go on Friday. Northwestern Roundtable. I will be there on the ground. I'm flying out of North Dakota on Christmas Day, flying back to Chicago, driving up to Detroit. It's going to be a long trip, but I'm super excited to do all of that and keep everybody covered with content moving forward. As well, the men's and women's basketball seasons right about to hit their stride in terms of conference play. Zach, I really appreciate you coming on today. It was a pleasure as always to talk to you. But, for those listening, where can they find you? Where can they find what you're doing and what you're working on?
Yeah, thanks, Gavin. I really love coming on the show and really love everything that Northwestern Roundtable has been able to put out here over the last couple months. If you're looking for me, at Zach Koons on X, that's where I'm sharing most of my work. You can also go find the Bleav in Northwestern podcast wherever you get your podcasts, on Apple, Spotify. Be sure to throw it a like, leave a review if you like the show. Really anything that you want to do on there. And then if you're looking for any of my writing, I'm at si.com for Sports Illustrated. My author page, I Bleav, is si.com/author/Zach-Koons. Got some more college football playoff content coming down the line. Right now, I ranked which teams need a national championship the most and the top 25 must-watch players in the playoff field. Of course, some of those players have now bowed out after the first round, so maybe we'll have to do an update. But yeah, you can find any of my work there. And thanks so much again, Gavin.
Awesome. Thank you so much for hopping on. As always, remember to subscribe to and follow the Northwestern Roundtable podcast on YouTube and Spotify. You can find more of our written coverage daily at northwesternroundtable.com or roundtable.io/sports/NCAA/Northwestern. We've got a lot of great coverage coming. I'm super excited to get up to Detroit and cover the Wildcats in their second bowl game in 3 years. As always, this is Gavin Dorsey signing off with Zach Koons saying so long, and thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.